Hello, everyone. I'm John Ball. I'm the founder of Patom theory, which is how brains work and we can apply it to language. And I'd like to introduce Chris Lonsdale. Hello, Chris.
Hi, John. How are you doing today?
I'm going really well. Maybe you should tell us something quickly about yourself so I know who I'm talking to.
All right. I'm I'm a psychologist, linguist, educator, entrepreneur, based in Asia. I am a published author in China, having written a bestseller in Chinese, penned in Chinese, not translated. I've got a TEDx talk on how to learn any language in 6 months. And for the last 15 years or so, I've been developing and making available to China a system called Kungfu English, which helps Mandarin Chinese people master English, because English learning has been a major challenge for them over the years. And so I went back to the basics. How do people learn a language? How can adults learn a language? And put that into a system that makes that knowledge and that approach available to everyone. I was fluent in Mandarin from zero start in 6 months after I went to China at 21. And
Wow.
At 24, 25, I was in Hong Kong and I became fluent in Cantonese in roughly the same time frame.
That sounds amazing. Do you think we'd be able to work together and bring maybe my AI together with your work and produce something?
I think that would be absolutely ideal. And the reason is that the language learning process, it's about 80% input. It's listening, it's responding to what you're hearing, not forcing yourself to speak, but you do need to get to a point where you have to actually open your mouth and talk to somebody. And that requires a two-way interaction. So yes, to be able to do that in a device, in a computer, have a digital avatar that actually understands you would be awesome.
What would we call it if we were to work on that?
Oh, I think you've already got the name.
Speech Genie.
Speech Genie.
That sounds like the most awesome language learning system since language evolved, Chris.
It absolutely is.
What would be the first?
The first is your brain. The human brain is absolutely fantastic at picking up a language, using language flexibly, creatively. No single utterance is the same as a previous one, other than the sort of ritualistic things that we do every day. But yeah, the human brain is absolutely awesome at picking up language and using language. And a system like Speech Genie makes the language learning process very, very effective because it meshes with what the brain knows how to do and does very, very well.
Well, let me just test you here against some science. Here's some work that I was reading lately with Patricia Kuhl. So in a 2010 TED Talk, she was talking about how language learning works. She's one of the experts in language learning for many decades now at University of Washington. And in this graph, she shows how up till about age 7, children are effortlessly learning language. And then it drops off where it's harder to learn the language after age 7, right through to 17-year-olds who are at the minimum learning capability. And it sounded like in your example, you were able to start with no Mandarin and learn it when you were about that age.
Yeah, 21, 22 was when I started the Mandarin.
Right. Imagine how good you would have been if you started earlier.
It's a function of how much time that you spend, because you can actually master the core of the language, which is only about 3,000 words, very, very quickly. Then after that, your competence in the language is a function of how much you actually reading things of interest, and then your vocabulary and your usage is building over time. And it's not slow and it's not fast. It's just consistent. So in your mother tongue, you're reading novels, you're reading the newspaper, you're reading technical papers, whatever it is, and that will increase your vocabulary and your understanding of the language over time. And the more that a person does it, then the more educated they are because they've met more words. But the core of the language, roughly 3,000 words, gives you 98% of anything you're gonna need in work or life. And that pretty much is saying that you've got that language. It's part of you then.
Right. Well, look, let me just throw a couple more scientific issues at you. On that, in terms of the language learning, it also has some other problems. It's the pronunciation, it's the recognition of the sounds. There's the well-known experience where the word raw and law in Japanese may not be detected because in the Japanese language, they don't make that distinction. Have you had any experience with what looks like in this graph here, a fundamental limitation where the Japanese infants by 12 months of age have lost a lot of their ability to detect that distinction?
If you're okay, so let me use a metaphor, right? If you only play tennis with your right hand and you play tennis right-handed for 20 years and someone asks you to play tennis with your left hand, you're going to do a very bad job of it.
I know that one from experience.
Okay. If you use both hands to play tennis, you're going to become very good at both hands.
Right. Yes.
Now, but what happens is basically any physical skill, and language in many, many ways is a physical skill. It's not knowledge. And big mistake people make is they treat it as knowledge. It's not. It's a physical skill, and it's made up of subsets of skills. Right? If you are putting your attention and your effort into building a skill in one particular direction, you come to rely upon that skill, and trying to do it another way becomes more and more difficult because at the end, we're all basically lazy. Right?
Okay, so right.
Does that make sense?
It does. So it's possible to, despite this research on babies and their brains specializing over a period of time, perhaps it's not a limitation where you just have to give up and say, well, now I'm 20 years old, I can never learn another language.
Exactly. This whole thing, but you've just answered the question with that word specialization, right? If you specialize in one direction, you're not specializing in another direction. So the relative skills are growing apart from each other. And there's very, very interesting work on the human brain and human brain plasticity. There's a book called The Brain That Changes Itself, I think. Basically, people are stroke patients, right? If one of their arms is not functional, the way that you actually get that to heal is to tape down the good arm. By taping down the good arm, you're forcing the brain to go to the other side and to reconnect to that injured pathway. If you don't do that, then that bad arm stays bad because the person is functional trying to get around in life just with the one good arm. You'll see this. Why do adults who go to another country appear to not master the language, but their children do master the language of that new country? And the reason is the adults are very good at getting workarounds. They will find someone who can translate. They will find ways to solve the problems of daily life using their mother tongue, and it's faster and more efficient to them than trying to start from zero and master the new language. So they don't do it. The kids, on the other hand, are playing with their friends, and they don't have any life pressure, making money, finding a place to live, all that stuff. So they get enough exposure in the new language to become competent and fluent in it.
Okay, so I think what I'm going to do with that problem is leave this as an outstanding question. Which is, can we prove this wrong with better emulation? And I think we can keep talking about this today. I'm just going to jump ahead to something that I know from your work, which is this was about the Cantonese accent example where Yeah, you know where I'm going. Where these people that spoke English, you started to teach them Mandarin, and they were starting to speak Mandarin with a Cantonese accent. And how could that possibly happen? Well, one of the things that I know through my brain research is that that area that I'm highlighting there, it's the auditory cortex in the human brain. That's picking up sound and refining the sounds that we're recognizing. And so while you're listening to another language, there's no reason for that part of your brain not to be finding patterns in it, categorizing them, and storing them. And in fact, that also connects to our speech center. So potentially, the sounds that you've heard and are recognizing, you can then pronounce. So it's
Yeah.
just an interesting observation in terms of the brain.
Oh, I was gobsmacked, because basically this was like people in their 40s, on average, and we were using Lozanoff's accelerated learning process for them to get Mandarin.
Okay.
And literally, the minute they started trying to say things, it was Cantonese in terms of the pronunciation. It's the same,
Right. Yes.
the same words, but it was Cantonese pronunciation, and very correct Cantonese pronunciation. It would be the way that a Cantonese speaker learning Mandarin would be speaking Mandarin with a heavy accent.
Hmm.
So yeah,
That
very
sounds like a
clearly.
very
Yeah, go on.
it's a very interesting scientific observation because one of the points I'll often make when I'm talking about brain science and AI is that the observations are the pure science. It's what we can see happening, and then our job is to model it so that we can replicate it in science.
And
And
one
it
of the other
sounds like that observation's very powerful for what the brain's doing when it learns language.
one of the other observations is, if you get somebody to listen to a target language, a language that they want to learn, with no requirement to understand it and no requirement to respond, but just listen to it the way that you would listen to birdsong, then over time and fairly short period of time, it becomes very clear. From fuzzy, mushy, they can't hear the distinctions between different sounds. They can't hear word transitions. It becomes clearer and clearer and clearer over time. And I had that experience where we produced a product called Rhythmic Spanish. And I was listening to the soundtrack, trying to just make sure everything was in order, and also give myself a chance to begin hearing Spanish. And it was a Saturday morning, and I was really irritated. And I was about to call the sound engineering team because all of the sounds were muffled and unclear, and it was just an unpleasant experience. But I didn't, because it was a weekend, and I listened the whole of the Saturday and the Sunday, and by Monday it was all clear. The problem was not the audio track. The problem was the filters in my auditory system that were not used to the Spanish sounds, but being exposed to them over 10, 12, 15 hours, that blockage went away.
Interesting. I had a very similar experience. We with the AI system I built that does the language conversion from text to meaning. We actually put in 8 different languages. Things including Japanese and Mandarin. And I learned as I had the words there, I could see the words even if they were characters. I could then recognize pieces of them and then their meaning. And even though I wasn't quite as quick as the example you were saying with the auditory, I was still able to start recognizing, hey, this is Japanese, this is Korean, this is Mandarin, just by seeing the characters and learning more about the words. And there was no effort in that. I was always focused on something else. But
exactly. That's been my experience. We build this into the course I did in China, Kungfu English, by having people brain soak. They literally just spend 30 minutes a day listening to English being spoken with no requirement to understand it, to respond or anything. And the general reaction to that is miraculous. Like they go, wow, not only am I now hearing the language clearly, but they literally are beginning to understand pieces of it, and they're beginning to use words from it that they've never consciously learned.
Right.
So there's the brain at a subconscious level is doing a hell of a lot of work to help us understand language. And all we need to do is to actually create the conditions for the brain to do what it already does very, very well. And we can easily and rapidly acquire a language. And when I'm looking back, my 6 months to get to Mandarin fluency, I was doing all of those things. I was putting myself in situations where I had to brain soak in Mandarin. I was in situations where I could connect visually what I was hearing with what the sounds of the language were communicating. I was proactively trying to make the sounds as I was hearing them, just mimicking them. And the mimicking process, you're ideally doing it without worrying about what the meaning is. You're just focusing on mimicking the sounds as closely as you can. And I sort of was quite good at that, partly because as a teenager, a friend of mine used to mimic Billy Connolly and tell Billy Connolly jokes, which are very, very funny, only in the Scottish accent. So the only way you can tell about Connolly jokes about speaking Scots, right? And the minute you speak in Scots, then you can tell a joke. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Right? So I set myself the goal of actually being able to mimic Billy Connolly as well, and that's a process partly of learning how to hear it, but you actually have to work to get your muscles in your face and your mouth to make the sounds the way that you want to make them. And that is a separate skill. So people think that getting a language is all the same thing. It's not. Hearing is one piece. Being able to make the sounds is a whole other piece. And being able to being comfortable with that is a whole other piece. And it actually touches on your identity. When you're actually working to get the sounds the way they should be, your face will be hurting, and that was my experience when I was first in China. Literally, there was like 3 or 4 weeks where my face really ached, like I'd been having a really solid workout. And other people who have subsequently given feedback to me about their language learning journey all report the same phenomenon, right? But I had something in Hong Kong a few years ago, very, very interesting. A French guy who spoke good English in terms of vocab and grammar, but he had a very strong, heavy French accent. He came to me and he asked for coaching on how to become sounding like a proper Englishman. And so I took him on and we started working, and about 45 minutes in, he was actually able to make the sounds of Oxford-like English very, very clearly. And he just looked at me and he went, "Ugh, this feels terrible. I'd rather keep my French." So the body feeling that goes with the sounds that you're making in a language gets tied up with the identity of who you are. And for some people, that's very, very challenging. So the fact that they don't get the accent right is not that they physiologically have any barrier to it. It is that their personality, their psychology doesn't like the feeling, and so they would prefer not to.
One of the things I find, Chris, I've just gotten back from Japan, and when you're talking to a native Japanese speaker, even if you know a few words, it's awkward to try and say it. So the idea that I could just go to Japan and start trying to speak Japanese doesn't really work for me, because it's just a very embarrassing situation to try and say a word and then get a whole stream of information back that I don't understand. How can you deal with that with your system?
Okay, well, the first thing is you need to be spending time hearing and learning to respond to what you're hearing without having to speak. Right? There's empirical evidence that there's a silent period, and if you try to speak before you get past that silent period, it becomes very, very difficult. Your whole being is not yet ready to start talking. So the first thing you do is you do a lot of input until you can understand and respond physically, non-verbally. So we use gaming methodology. So you'll be hearing things and you'll be picking objects in the screen as your response to what you're hearing. You get to start practicing how to say individual words with feedback loops. So you literally, you'll say it, you'll hear a model, you compare yourself with the model. And if you're not improving and you can't hear the difference, that's because you haven't actually opened your brain filters enough. But we have these various different components that cycle together in a spiral. So you keep meeting the same stuff, but at higher levels of complexity over time, and you're always training different physical aspects of the skill. So you get to practice all of the core words, the sounds of those words, listen to them. You're not worried about what it means. You're not trying to communicate with someone else, but you're training your muscles. You're training the connection between your muscles and your hearing. So that was why the original product we did in China is called Kungfu English. Kungfu actually is Gongfu, and in Chinese it means a skill developed with practice over time.
Yes, right.
Right. So
that sounds like language.
Yeah, it's truth in advertising, right? But one of the insights that I had was that language is physical, right? We've got all these physical components in the brain, in the mouth, everything else, and we need to take an approach of physical training to actually develop those parts, and that then gets us into understanding the meaning and everything else next. But you have to do this basic stuff. So mimicking, look at the face from the nose to the chin, hear it, mimic it as you, and your brain sort of knows how to make that change. If you're seeing the face and you're mimicking the sound, you're much more likely to be accurate very quickly.
Right. I actually put a couple of slides together that show what's going on in the brain when we're learning things, because Patom theory is all about how regions of the brain perform specific functions, connect together, but they never do what computers do, which is encode information and send it around. That computational model has been the one that everybody's been applying since the 1950s, since computers started to be developed.
Right.
So let me just show you a couple of diagrams here. So in this one, so there's the human brain. The left side's normally where language is, and that's the auditory cortex in blue. But we can look at this one, and what we're seeing here is that was this area here was the region where the auditory information comes into the brain. But if we go down here, this is where words are recognized. This is known as Wernicke's area, where we comprehend language. And then as it projects forward, this is Broca's area, where it controls the muscles required in order to speak.
Is your mouse over, or I'm not seeing the mouse moving over it?
How about if I do it this way? So, there's the area that where the auditory sound comes in. Words are recognized here, projected to Wernicke's area, which is around here. And then there's this big bundle of fibers that connect from the temporal lobe, where sound is being handled, to the frontal lobe, where the motor control takes place. So so this is Broca's area here, and the motor control for our mouth and lips and breathing sort of down around this area. So the interesting part is this arcuate. This arcuate connection is automatic. So when you hear things as in a baby, when we're looking at the brain activation, you've got a fair bit of activity taking place here because it's auditory, and that's where words are being recognized. But they could also see that Broca's area was quite active. So even if the child wasn't speaking, there's still that connection with the motor area. So it's like the sound is being mimicked in the brain and trained for that recognition later.
Exactly.
It's all automatic.
Exactly.
I don't know how you teach somebody to listen and pick out sounds.
Well, here's the thing, right? In my experience, you listen until you can hear the sounds, until they're all clear, and then you start trying to make those sounds. So I would have a discipline. I would have some sounds that I was working on, and I would just be walking to the subway or whatever, and I would literally be going over these sounds that I could hear in my head and trying to replicate them through my mouth and my vocal cords. And I would be
Right.
listening to what was coming out and trying to map it to what I was hearing in my head.
It sounds like the exact process that babies use when they're learning language. I mean, I used to hear about how babies babble with all of the phonemes, all of the sounds that are in the world's languages, like 800 of them. Babies make those sounds when they're 6 months of age. But by the time they're 12 months of age, they only babble in the phonemes or the sounds of the language that they're learning. If they're learning two languages, they can babble in both of those. But it's interesting. There's just that connection in our brains that helps us learn the language.
In Kungfu English, I have a trance induction audio, which I encourage people to use at night just before they go to sleep, and to go into a babbling state and to babble themselves to sleep.
Wow. I'm looking forward to doing this new course when we built it. That's for sure.
Right. I mean, you look at what babies do, and then you look at how kids, teenagers are taught language. These are two totally different worlds. And if you just mimic what the baby does, how does that lead to an outcome for an adult? And in my experience is the better you can mimic what the baby does with some adult twists to it, then the faster you get to mastery of the new language.
Right. It sounds very much like the concept I've heard you use, the term language parent, where as a learner, the language parent is helping you to progress.
Yeah, exactly. And basically, I came up with language parent because people in the language industry want to teach. And my partner a few years ago was testing out somebody else's language system, and she got on a call with this tutor, and they were having this conversation in English, which she, by the way, had already learned through Kungfu English. But she basically 90% of the way in, the guy finally said, "Oh, you made a mistake. Now I can do my job." And it was like, no. Your job is not to pick up mistakes. Your job as a language parent is to understand what is being said, even if the grammar is wrong, even if the sounds are not perfect, and to simply use clarification and modeling the correct way to do it as an integral part of the interaction. And that's what a language parent does. And it's like a mother. The mother will understand the baby, you know. "My want butt."
Yeah.
"You want a bath?" "Yeah, my want butt." The parent understands that. But the child also hears the parent say the correction, which is a clarification, and they go, "Oh, okay." And you see that actually working out. Years ago, my daughter, we were out walking, and there was a millipede on the path, and she stopped and she squatted down and she looked at it and she said, "Minipede, minipede." And then she goes, "No, millipede."
Right.
So she'd stored it, and she
Very clever.
tried saying it. It's so if you start observing children, what they're doing, they're looking at the parent, they're looking at the mother's face, they're looking at the father's face, right? They're hearing sounds. They're mimicking those sounds. So they hear the parents cussing. The first thing that you hear them saying is that cussing, right? They're literally hearing it and storing it and modeling it. And that is an integral part of the whole language learning process. And even if you're 80 years old, you want to learn a new language, you have to do that.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, I wanted to show you another concept that was being discussed in the AI community, where world famous computer scientists are saying children learn by watching TV. All they have to do is watch TV and listen, and they'll just become native speakers. And so I thought, well, here's the TV from the 1940s, and it doesn't look like the sort of device that you'd be able to learn from. But more interestingly, it's not how children learn language. Here, this came from an article that was describing that type of learning. So the study showed babies don't learn a language from watching television, even educational programming, and that before the age of 2, it can delay language development. So if babies learn their first languages through face-to-face interactions with caretakers, I'm interested in whether that's true for other types of interactions for adults, where an adult's learning another language and they're using video and auditory interactions in order to learn. What's your experience on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. First of all, I would say that with a baby who's under 2, the television is going to be a distraction. That it's going to have a level of complexity in the language that they won't understand, but it's got lots of movement, lots of colors that's going to take their attention, so they're not going to be interacting with a real person. So that would explain for me why the performance actually drops off.
Right.
For an adult, it's more complicated, because an adult who's just beginning with a new language tends to be a little bit not confident. They're easily shy. They
self-conscious.
They're not self-conscious. There you go. All right. So that's an example of where I'm in the Chinese channel and not popping across to the English channel. They're very self-conscious, and so that emotional baggage gets in the way of them talking, performing with the person that they're interacting with. What we have discovered is that, for instance, for the pronunciation, if you do video of the face, right, just of the face and the sound, and you're mimicking the sound, that is a perfectly good alternative to a real person for interaction.
Yes.
And as a baby, you can look at an adult's face and they're going to do baby talk with you, and they're going to interact with you on the baby level. Imagine you're 45 and you're with someone in another country, and you start looking at their face like a baby would. They think you're a little bit weird, and they're not going to give you the time of day to do that. You don't have that luxury as an adult. So video of that is adequate to meet the needs that the brain has to see the face, to mimic the sounds. So you can again. This word programming is interesting, right? You can use multimedia for very specific skills training, and it works perfectly well for an adult. You use audio, you're hearing it with our L2B, you're hearing phrases and you're seeing line drawings that are unambiguous. And you're able to respond directly to the meaning of what you're hearing by selecting the line drawings. So again, by limiting the context of what you're trying to do, by focusing the attention on specific elements of the skills, and then by looping that in a spiral, you can literally reproduce the experiential learning process that a child would go through, or at least a good enough facsimile of it for an adult to learn the language.
I guess one of the things people are afraid of when they're going to learn a new language is just how many words they have to memorize and phrases. A lot of people are scared at the thought of having to memorize, 2,000 phrases in the new language. It just sounds like a really hard task to do, to learn a language.
Well, I can't memorize 2,000 phrases in English. We don't learn language by memorizing phrases. And for years, 10,000 English phrases. And Chinese people would literally spend years learning these phrases. No, when we're learning a language, we are connecting the sounds that we're hearing to internal representations of the world. So that means we are connecting to, say, there's a bottle, right? So we have the feeling of a bottle. We have the sound of a bottle when you tap it. You have the weight of the bottle. You have the shape of the bottle that you can see. You have experiences of dropping glass bottles and having them break. So all of those sensory memories are part of what our brain is doing. And it's mapping all of those different representations that are internal to us to the sounds that we're hearing. And so as a learner, you need to consciously make sure that you're connecting what you're hearing with the internal representations, with the world. The worst thing you can do is try and translate. And then even worse, and as bad, is to try and start with text that you don't know the sound of and map from that text in a foreign language to your new language, because guaranteed you're going to be saying it wrong based on the way it's spelled, because you're using your spelling rules for your own language, and this other language uses different rules.
Yes.
So you start with a sound. It's
fascinating, Chris, and there's so much alignment with Patom theory, because the concept that I've got is that as you're hearing something, your auditory region has to work out what's going on. And if there's words that align with the sound that you've heard, great. Your auditory region can detect that. And then if it's got to work out the meaning, it can project to the area that's got that multi-sensory information you just described at its disposal to work out what it is you're talking about.
Exactly.
But if you then add into that process recognizing the words, now you've got a visual part of your brain connecting to your auditory part of your brain to work out what this sounds like in order to make a word, in order to then it sounds like overload to me if we're not careful.
It is definitely
makes much better sense.
Yeah, you can't do it. You can't read and hear and make the sounds and connect to meaning and do it grammatically all at the same time, because none of those skills are automatic, and human memory is limited to 7 plus or minus 2, as I think you know, right? You can only hold a certain amount of information in short-term memory, and most of the approaches to teaching a language basically take you out of that window, and there's just overload of information, so you can't handle it. But the way to fix that is you break it down into components that loop over time, and you automate each piece of it. So once you're automatic, that 7 plus or minus 2 doesn't count any longer, because the unconscious part of your brain is doing all the work.
Yes, that's one of George Miller's magic equations that I think that came from the 1950s. And he finished up at Princeton. He's the guy that invented WordNet, which is one of the systems that I use to help understand the interaction between language and meaning. Back 15 years ago now. But not nice to think of my heroes in a really practical application.
Indeed. So all of this information is there, from psycholinguistics to training, various things, and we just need to put them together in combinations that make the learning process for an adult mimic that of a child. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to learn another language through that process very, very effectively. It doesn't matter if you're 30, 40, 50. The caveat to that is if you have some form of brain damage or some form of disability, which makes your mother tongue very, very difficult for you, then there's going to be some challenges. But other than that, on balance, adults can and have and do effectively learn a second language up to a very competent level, and sometimes to perfection.
Right. So I think we're just about out of time, Chris. For me to wrap up, I just wanted to point out how exciting it is to be able to take theoretical neuroscience, which is Patom theory, and apply it to the real world in something that's really valuable to get right. Because I think there's a lot of scientific evidence from the cognitive sciences that aren't being exploited in language learning. By others, it sounds like you've been exploiting them for some time, but I'd really like to take the theoretical information and apply it to different types of problems. I might just finish before I ask you to wrap up with one of the strange observations from a TV show I saw ages ago about how the brain works. And there was this guy that had a stroke, and they're trying to talk to him, and he's just stuttering. He can't produce words. It's terrible. And then they say, "But can you now say that with a Northern English accent?" And the guy, I don't do Northern English accents, but the guy then breaks into this beautiful prose explaining about his problem and what he can't do. And it seemed like a trick. but it was just genuinely one of those strange brain things that he could pronounce all this with that accent, but not with his native one.
Yep, and that was because the other accent, that part of the brain that had those patterns stored, was damaged, so he couldn't access that information. It's fairly, I think it's fairly straightforward.
It makes sense to me. That would be my explanation as well. But then I always find it easy to talk to you, Chris, because you've got so much expertise in the application of brain science with with all of your time studying and applying it. Anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I think this idea that there's a period that you have to get language, and after that you're never going to do it, ultimately originally came from Piaget way back. And when I was doing my psycholinguistics paper, like 1980 or something, I literally wrote, Piaget's wrong, I'm going to prove it. And then I went to China and did so with my own learning. Because I tried to learn French and failed. I tried to learn Russian and failed. And it was obvious to me that the methodology of language instruction certainly wasn't giving me the outcome that I wanted. But I knew that if we applied brain science, then we could do it. So to everyone out there who's been struggling with a second language, who wants to learn a second language, you can do it. There is hope. You just have to approach it the right way with the right methodology. For you as a learner, basically you need to reactivate the innate wisdom of the baby, of the young child, and apply that in how you learn. And if you're looking for support, then what we're doing with Speech Genie, creating a tool to allow you to re-experience growing up again, but in a second language, is coming soon. And if you can give us some support, then we will get that out to everybody as fast as we possibly can.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining me today. And to everybody else, I'm looking forward to doing more of these as we start working on this new project.
That'd be great. I look forward to having more conversations and really getting into some of the details of this work.
Tremendous.